Yes, yes.
Welcome. Thank you. Come on up.
This way.
Thank you.
That remains standing.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat, please. Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Martin Gravely III. It is spelled MartinGravely.
How are you employed?
I'm employed with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in the Division of Forensic Science as a firearms examiner.
How long have you been with the crime lab?
I've been with the crime lab since 2022. I started as a laboratory technician, and in April of 2023, I was promoted up to a crime lab scientist as a firearms examiner.
As a firearms examiner, what are your duties?
I examine firearms to determine if they are operable, if they function properly. I also am able to determine if fired ammunition components, such as bullets and cartridge cases, were fired from a particular firearm.
What is the education and training that allows you to be a firearms examiner?
I received a Bachelor's of Science in Forensic Science from Piedmont University. I also, once I was promoted to crime lab scientist, then went through a roughly 15-month to a two-year-long training program in-house, which dealt with manufacturing processes of making firearms and different manufacturing processes of bullets and cartridge cases, as well as comparison microscopy, which is where we use a comparison microscope, which is similar to that of a compound microscope that you might find in a biology lab. We use those to determine if a bullet or cartridge case was fired from a particular firearm. After that, I then went through a roughly 7 months to 1 year long period called supervised casework, where I did real cases under the direct supervision of another fully trained examiner who reworked my case to ensure that I did everything properly. After that, I became an independent examiner.
Have you ever testified as an expert in firearms examination or firearms identification?
I have.
How many times?
6 times.
Judge, the state tenders Martin Gravely as an expert in firearms examination and identification.
No objection.
So ordered. Folks, again, experts are here to assist you in your task as finders of fact. Just like any witness, any credibility or not credibility is solely for you to decide. Proceed.
Can you explain to the jury what firearm identification is?
Firearm identification is the branch of forensic science that deals with identifying whether or not a particular bullet or cartridge case was fired from a particular firearm.
And what specifically is a firearm?
A firearm is an action, or it is a machine with a type of action that a trigger specifically, that when it is pulled, it uses the products of combustion to propel a projectile down the barrel of a firearm.
What are the different types of firearms?
So there are long guns and handguns. Long guns are your shotguns and your rifles. They're typically designed to be fired from the shoulder with 2 hands. And then your handguns, there are several types. The primary ones are pistols, which are or semi-automatic pistols, where you use a magazine and you insert it into typically the grip, and it's designed to be fired with 1 hand. Good firearm safety says you should fire it with 2 hands. And when you fire it, it automatically ejects the cartridge case from the firearm without use from the shooter. In contrast, a revolver has multiple cartridges inserted into a cylinder that is raised into in line with the barrel, and the firing pin or hammer. And so when you fire it, you have to manually remove the cartridge cases from the cylinder. So that's the primary difference between those two firearms.
What do the terms single action and double action mean?
So single action so both of them refer to what happens as you're pulling the trigger. And so with single action, it means when you pull the trigger, one thing happens. So typically, when you pull the trigger, the hammer falls, detonates the cartridge. With double action, you will pull the trigger and it will cock the hammer. And as you cock the hammer, once the trigger is fully pulled, then it will release the hammer, striking the primer and detonating the cartridge. So single action, one action happens, it just drops the hammer. Double action, two actions are happening, it cocks the hammer and then releases the hammer.
How are you able to determine if a bullet or cartridge case was fired from a particular firearm?
So like I said before, I use a comparison microscope. It is, like I said, a compound microscope joined together by an optical bridge. It has two stages on it that I'm able to manipulate, and so I will be able to look at two fired ammunition components, specifically a cartridge case or a bullet, and I'm able to view them at the same magnification under the similar lighting. And what I'm looking for, I have a demonstrative if it would help the jury figure out a bullet versus a cartridge case.
Would that be all right, Judge?
I don't even know what it is, and I haven't heard an objection, so that's fine.
So typically, this is what most people would consider to be a bullet. The bullet is only this part. The entirety of it is what is called a cartridge. A cartridge is a single unit of unfired ammunition, and so it consists of the bullet, the primer, which you can see here, the cartridge case as a whole, and then there's gunpowder inside. And so when the firing pin, or when the firearm's trigger is pulled, the firing pin is released and it strikes the primer, and when it does that, a spark then travels through what is called the flash hole, which you can see here, and it ignites the gunpowder within, causing rapid gas expansion. That rapid gas expansion pushes the bullet out of the mouth of the cartridge case and into the barrel. So I'll get to that in a moment. But with the cartridge case, when that happens, it is pressed back into what is called the breech face of the firearm. The breech face is just where the cartridge case sits in the firearm. And so when it does that, it leaves a negative impression of that breech face on the cartridge case. It is also then grabbed by the extractor, and it's pulled back through the force of the rapid gas expansion, and it strikes what is called an ejector, and it hits and it's kicked out of the firearm. The bullet, on the other hand, as that's happening simultaneously, the bullet travels into the barrel of the firearm and it engages what is called rifling. Rifling are raised and lowered lands and grooves in the barrel that give a twist to the bullet that allows it to spin, granting it more accuracy. So all of these areas that I just discussed, the rifling, the breech face, the ejector, the extractor, the firing pin, all of these things leave behind marks that are created during the manufacture of each of the items. Each of these items have individual characteristics, which are microscopic imperfections created from the manufacture of those parts. It's also from wear and tear. And each of these individual characteristics are similar to that of the firearm's fingerprint. And through comparison microscopy with my comparison microscope, I can compare these two items to see the individual characteristics from one bullet or cartridge case to another. And that's how I'm able to determine whether or not a particular firearm fired bullets or cartridge cases.
Okay, and I heard you mention the individual characteristics. Is there something called class characteristics?
Yes, so class characteristics are characteristics that the manufacturer of the firearm intend to make. So for example, Glock, typically, unless it's a 45 caliber Glock, their rifling structure will have six lands and grooves with a right twist. There are other firearms, such as High Point comes to mind, with a 3 lands and grooves with a left twist. These are class characteristics that help narrow down from a general pool of firearms that could have fired any of these bullets or cartridge cases to a much smaller list. There are other types of class characteristics, such as firing pin impression shape. There are circular or hemispherical. There are elliptical or teardrop apertures and whatnot. These all help assist narrowing down a large group of firearms into a smaller group, into a smaller group, into a smaller group, but no identification can be made off of just class characteristics alone. We have to look at the individual characteristics.
Okay. And was evidence submitted to you by the Hall County Sheriff's Office in this case?
It was, yes.
I'm gonna show you what's marked States Exhibit 187. Recognize this.
I do. It is a Glock 9mm handgun. I recognize it by the unique Division of Forensic Science barcode that is affixed to all items of evidence at the GBI. This one is 2025-1007495. I also recognize it because I see my initials from where I sealed the evidence. I also recognize it by my initials on the firearm itself and the magazine. I also can see the serial number present.
And now I'm going to show you what I've got marked States Exhibit 190. Do you recognize that?
I do recognize it. I recognize it as a Beretta 9mm firearm. Again, with the Division of Forensic Science barcode on it, as well as my initials on the box, the trigger guard, and the magazine, as well as its serial number, which is on the other side of the firearm. But I recognize it through all the other indicators.
And I want to show you what I've got marked States Exhibit 191. Do you recognize this item?
I do. Again, it is one 9mm cartridge case. I recognize it from the the Division of Forensic Science barcode and my initials.
And I'm handing you what is marked States Exhibit 189. Do you recognize that?
I do. It's another 9mm cartridge case. I recognize it again through my initials as well as the barcode.
And States Exhibit 192.
This is another 9mm cartridge case. Again, I recognize it through the barcode as well as my initials.
And States Exhibit 188.
This would be a bullet that I identified to be a 9mm bullet. I recognize it with my initials as well as the Division of Forensic Science barcode.
And looking at those items, States Exhibits 187, 188, 189, 190, 191, and 92, did you receive those, what date did you receive those at the crime lab?
I received them on, I received the bullet on March 12th of 2025, and I received the firearms and the cartridge cases on May 15th of 2025.
Okay. And had these items been previously submitted to the crime lab for testing by someone other than yourself?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Can you explain to the jury what outsourcing is?
So typically with an outsourced case, we will send it off to because we had so many cases at the time, we would send some of these cases out to an outsourced agency to run their own experiments or run their own, collect their own conclusions and findings, run their own experiments on it. They will generate their own test fires and they will come to their own conclusions. And then they will be sent back to us, and then we will release a report based off of them. If and when those cases then go to court, they will be reworked in-house by a trained examiner through the GBI, and that is what happened in this case.
So when you received these items, State's Exhibits 187 through 192, what did you do with the items when you received them?
When I received the items, I examined the cartridge cases and bullets first to determine their class characteristics. So again, back to what I was saying earlier about leading from these cartridge cases could have been fired from any number of firearms to trying to narrow that list down. I looked at the firing pin impression shape or the rifling structure, and if they had the same class characteristics to the firearm, I would then test fire the firearm to then compare them microscopically to determine if they were fired from the same firearm. So I looked at the cartridge cases, found that they did have the same class characteristics, so then I test fired the firearms, and then I compared the test fires to the evidence items. I compared them to the test fires.
And so did you reach any conclusions? First, let's start with item 8. Your item 8, which is our Exhibit 188.
I did reach a conclusion with the bullet, item 8. It was fired, item 8 was fired from the firearm. My item 12.A, which is State's Exhibit 187, based on class and individual characteristics.
Okay, and is your item 8, which is our 187, which gun is that?
That would be the Glock.
Okay, so so we've got the projectile that was recovered from the medical examiner was fired from the Glock, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then did you make any findings concerning the Beretta, which is, let's see, our Exhibit 190 and your item number 13A?
I did. I found that both the Beretta and the Glock were operational. I also found that the cartridge cases, my items 14 and 16 were fired from the Beretta, and they're State's Exhibit 191 and 192.
Okay, and what are those? What actually are those? What are State's Exhibits 190 and 192?
They're 9mm cartridge cases.
Okay. And so then, did you make, let's see, also concerning the Glock, did you make any conclusion about the cartridge case that is item 15 for you, and 189 is our exhibit number?
I did. That cartridge case was fired from the Glock.
Okay. So did you do any other testing on the firearms?
I determined that they were operational, so I did what is called a check function test, where when I test fired the firearms, I ensured that they were operational. With the Beretta, I also did what is called a bump off or push off test. Because it has an exposed hammer, what I will do is I will check the hammer at all configurations. So it has a half cock and then a full cock. And then I will try to, with hand strength, push it forward to try and determine if the hammer will be removed from its position without pulling the trigger. I did those tests. It passed, meaning that the hammer did not fall. And there's another test that I did not perform because as a functional firing pin safety, it's called a bump off test, where we keep the hammer at rest and we strike it with a hammer, or a rubber mallet rather, to determine if it will detonate a cartridge. But again, I did not perform that test because it has a functional firing pin safety, and it could damage it.
Okay. And looking at State's Exhibit 190, which is the Beretta, is there a safety on that?
The Beretta did have a number of safeties, yes. It had a manual safety, which is, it is a slide-mounted ambidextrous safety, where when it is faced up like this, and there's a little red dot, the firearm is not safe. The safety is disengaged, which means that the firearm can fire. When the safety is engaged, it physically pivots and it disconnects the sear and trigger assembly, meaning that it literally will move it. So if it's set like this to where the firing pin can be struck, it moves it like this to where the firing pin cannot be struck. It also decocks the hammer and acts as a decocker. So if you had the hammer ready to fire and you activated the safety, it will fall and not detonate a cartridge.
So it sounds like you're saying the Beretta has a manual safety,
That's correct.
and that if you don't disengage the safety, what happens?
If you do not disengage the safety, meaning that the red dot is present, the firearm could be shot.
It could be shot.
It could be, yes, if you pull the trigger.
Okay. So if the safety is engaged and you pull the trigger, what happens?
So because it disconnects the sear trigger, or because it disconnects the firing pin or sear trigger linkage, essentially the trigger will just move, but it will not do anything to the firing components. It will not activate the hammer. It won't do anything. Essentially, it renders the firearm inert.
Okay. And does a Glock have a manual safety?
No,
Did you perform any trigger pull tests?
I did.
Results?
So a trigger pull test, before I get to the results, a trigger pull test is essentially we take, if you've been to a grocery store and you put your fruit on one of those scales, it's very similar to that measuring device. So what I'll do is I'll take the hook part and I will put it into the trigger, and then I will hold it in a normal position, and I will pull it to determine the weight that it takes to pull the trigger. So I did that with both the Glock and the Beretta. And my findings for both of those, the Glock had an average trigger pull of about 5.75 pounds, which is the equivalent of about a half a gallon of milk. And the Beretta, it has single action and double action, similar to what we discussed earlier, where if you do the single action, all you're doing is pulling the trigger and the hammer is released. That trigger pull weight was about 4.5 pounds, and the double action one was about 12.75 pounds. So 10 pounds would be about a full gallon of milk.
Okay. And then, did you say what the trigger pull on the Glock is?
Yes, I did, but I can repeat it. It is about 5.75 pounds.
Okay. And now, talking about the Beretta specifically, if there were a total of 4 unspent rounds matching the ammunition, the same ammunition that was located in the Beretta, based on your training and experience, what events could cause those live rounds to come out of the firearm without it being fired?
The way that I would expect cartridges to be removed from a firearm unfired would be having to rack the slide. Racking the slide being when you hold the firearm either with your right or left hand. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to do it like this. When you rack the slide, you pull the slide, which is the top part of it, the metal part typically, you pull it rearward, and by doing that, the extractor is going to hold on to the cartridge head, like what my hand is doing, and it's going to pull it and kick it out. So if you don't fire the gun and you rack the slide, it could or it will remove the cartridge that's from the chamber, provided it's the correct ammunition. Another way is if there is no magazine in the firearm, and again, you rack the slide, but you don't have enough strength, it could be enough to possibly remove it from the chamber and get it to fall out. But again, you would have to rack the slide no matter what.
If a person unfamiliar with the Beretta left the safety engaged, could that contribute to live rounds being expelled?
Not necessarily. If the safety is engaged and they're I can't testify necessarily to unfamiliarity, but if the safety is engaged and you're not ready for that, and you expect the trigger to detonate the cartridge, one may go to try to rack the slide. So it's possible, but in the event of the safety being engaged or disengaged or engaged does not necessarily mean that the cartridge will come out. But someone will have to rack the slide.
Okay. And would it surprise you if there was a spent shell casing located in the chamber of the Beretta when it was cleared by the crime scene?
I'm familiar with where the casing was from the firearm. In the event of a normal firing situation, that would be surprising, yes.
Do you have an opinion based on your training and experience, how it might be that a spent shell casing would be found inside a gun like a Beretta when the chamber is cleared?
The only way that I could see a casing remaining within the firearm after the firearm has been shot is if there was a jam, or that's about the only way that I would expect it. Because like I said, the extractor is going to grab the head, and provided it's the correct ammunition for that firearm, it's going to grab it and kick it out. After it's fired, there shouldn't be a cartridge case within the chamber, provided everything goes correctly.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Just a few questions, okay?
Okay.
Specifically, I want to just talk to you about the Beretta, okay?
Yeah.
You said that if the Beretta is functioning properly, once it is fired, the casing should be ejected.
Yes, that's correct.
Because it's designed to function that way. That's how it functions. It fires and then it ejects the empty casing.
Yes, that's correct. That's how semi-automatic pistols function, yes.
And if it doesn't, that just means there's been some problem with the gun? Is that what the idea is?
Not necessarily. If you're unfamiliar with firearms, or if you're unfamiliar in general, if you're unfamiliar in general with firearms, you may have what is called like a limp wrist when you're shooting, or if you're shooting with the wrong hand, you may not be ready for that recoil. And so when you hold a firearm to shoot, if you have a limp wrist, it might mess up the timing of the extraction and kicking it out of the firearm, which could cause malfunctions such as like a stovepipe. But provided that you're using the firearm properly and you have a firm grip, everything should function properly, provided that the firearm is operational.
Some sort of, in other words, what you're saying is it can stay in the chamber because the person who's firing it is not holding it firmly enough.
Not necessarily the chamber. I would expect it to remain.
In the barrel.
No. So I would expect it to remain within that area. So when it comes to a firearm, there's the barrel, which is the part where the bullet travels through, and then there's the chamber where the cartridge sits. So they're two separate, they're attached by the same metal, but they're two separate areas. And so when it fires, the cartridge case comes back and ideally comes out of the chamber and gets kicked out. Now, if there's a limp wrist or if the firearm is malfunctioning, the recoil still should act on the cartridge case to the point where it comes out. It just may not, because of the timing, it may get stuck in the ejection port, which would cause a stovepipe, which would look similar to this, with the slide not being fully pushed back or forward, and it just stuck kind of like this out of the gun.
And I'm going to use this sort of replica, okay?
Okay.
What you mean is, it would try to eject it, and then it would be sticking up, the empty shell would be sticking up, basically poking out of here.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. That's what you call stovepipe.
That's correct. It's a failure to eject malfunction.
And I'm talking about where the shell casing is still actually in the barrel.
Right. I would not expect that from it, provided that the ammunition is correct. I would not expect that kind of a malfunction. I would expect more of a failure to feed malfunction where the slide tries to take another cartridge out of the magazine, so there's two cartridges trying to fit one hole, or like I said, a failure to eject, which is more of a stovepipe. I would not expect that.
I want to ask you now then about I think you were talking about when actual full, I'm using the word bullets, but that's not the right word. The whole thing is called a?
Cartridge.
Cartridge. The whole cartridge is situations where the whole cartridge is actually coming out of the gun, out of the top, okay? Mm-hmm. And I think you said in order for that to happen, this thing has to be pulled back to slide, right?
Yes, for a full cartridge to be ejected from there, it has to be pulled back. Yes.
You're calling that a rack.
Yeah, racking the slide. Yes.
If you've got a shell, if you've got a cartridge stuck into the barrel, okay? So it didn't function the way it's supposed to function. You've still got a cartridge in there, and you rack the gun. Am I correct? Cartridges can come out from racking the gun.
It's possible that would be what I call that would be called a failure to feed malfunction, where essentially there's still a cartridge case within the chamber, and another cartridge comes up, but it can't go entirely in there. So typically what will happen is the slide will try to move forward, and you would have to, again, pull the slide back to remove the cartridge. Typically, you should drop the magazine to do all of that if you want to clear the actual malfunction itself. But yes, that's possible.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Would it be possible for someone to stick the spent shell casing back in the gun?
Yes, it's possible.
And did you find any stovepiping on the shell casing from the Beretta?
I saw no damage that would indicate any kind of stovepipe or any type of malfunction from the cartridge cases.
If you were holding the Beretta at an awkward angle and you don't have a good grip on it, and the slide, and you're racking, the slide comes back and hits something here, preventing it from going all the way back, could that sort of action keep the Beretta from ejecting the casing?
Can you repeat the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yep. So if you're trying to fire the gun and you're racking the slide back, but there's an object right here that's preventing, the slide hits and doesn't come all the way back. Is that something that could prevent a shell casing from being ejected?
If it's coming back, the casing has already been ejected, so it would affect more along the lines of the next cartridge being inserted into the chamber.
Okay.
If there was something blocking, so let's say you shoot the gun and there's something physically blocking the slide as it moves rearward, that could affect the casing coming out of the chamber. Yes.
Okay, and would that have any effect on a live round being ejected, coming out of the gun?
If you shoot the firearm and it does not eject properly, it could cause the next cartridge to be pulled, which would cause a double feed situation. It would just cause another malfunction in the situation, but I would not expect a cartridge to just flop out. It would lock up the gun.
So what are the ways that live rounds can be ejected from a gun like the Beretta?
If you are doing it, if you are using the firearm properly, just racking the slide would get the cartridge out, or just dropping the mag and doing it and removing them from the magazine itself.
And if you are not operating the gun properly?
Those are still the only ways that I could see you removing the cartridges, is racking the slide. There may be a malfunction, or removing the magazine and then removing the cartridges from the magazine itself.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions.
Thank you for your testimony. You may be excused.
Yeah, yeah.
You're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
What do you have next?